On today's Locked On Giants podcast, ESPN draft analyst Jordan Reid offers his thoughts on the Giants quarterback situation, their best options at number 3, and a whole lot more. That's coming your way next here on Locked On Giants.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Trainer, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And on today's show, I'm very, very honored to have this special guest of ours, Jordan Reid, ESPN draft analyst. We had him on the show a long time ago, but he's since, gone on to bigger and better things. And I'm just so happy to have him back. Jordan, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem, Patricia. It's always a pleasure being able to join you. Even though it's been a while, I'm excited to be back.
Well, we're excited to have you, and we're excited to talk Giants draft and draft in general. And Jordan, obviously the big question everybody wants to know, and I'm going to start there, and you know what's coming, the quarterback situation. We've heard so much about, the order of the quarterbacks, whether this is a good enough class. Let's start there if we could. Let's start with your assessment of this quarterback class. Are people selling this class short, or is it really as bad as it sounds?
Well, it's not as great as what we saw last year when we saw 6 quarterbacks go inside of the top 12, which is something, frankly, we had never seen before. So the depth of this year's class is nowhere near as good as last year's class. But I do think we have 2 first-round worthy quarterbacks at the top of this year's draft, and Cam Ward of Miami, and then also Shedeur Sanders of Colorado. They couldn't be any more different as far as their playing style, but their how they got here moment is very similar. Just starting with Cam, his journey from Incarnate Word to Washington State to Miami. He is the prototype as far as what you want at the position. He can throw from many types of arm angles. He can win successfully from the pocket, and then also he can create outside of the pocket as well. But just love the underdog mentality that he plays with. That's something that you're going to hear a lot with him, and he's changed every single program that he's been to as well. And then on the opposite end, we have Shedeur Sanders of Colorado. Very similar journey, as his career started off at Jackson State before transitioning to Colorado, where he took over that program and really reignited, which was one of the worst programs in the FBS. Being able to take over that program and win a bunch of games like he was able to do was definitely remarkable. Very different from Cam Ward in a sense, that very accurate from inside of the pocket. His ball is predicated upon ball placement and then also accuracy, but the poise that he plays with. I think he's by far the toughest quarterback in this year's class as well, just because of the number of sacks and then also the number of hits that he took. His offensive line was not great any year that he was there as well, but the traits as far as, how physically gifted each one is, I think Cam definitely has more than Shedeur, but I think right now Shedeur is more polished from the pocket than what Cam is.
You look at where the Giants are, they obviously need to get their quarterback of the future. Is Shedeur Sanders, in your opinion, a top 3 pick where, it makes sense, gives good value for the Giants to pick him there? Or is he maybe somebody you want to try and get a little later on in the first round?
Well, so I have him as a late first round pick right now. And if we're just stacking the board, he's my number 19 overall player. So at number 3 overall, of course, that would be considered a reach if we're just looking at our board. But there's always a thing that I like to call the quarterback tax, of where those guys are definitely pushed up the board, especially if you're in need of a young quarterback, which the Giants are right now, even though they signed Jameis Winston, then also Russell Wilson. I still think if the opportunity presents himself and they have the opportunity to select Shedeur Sanders, I definitely think it is something that they have to consider. But if we're just ranking the board and Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter is there for them, I definitely think either one of those players will be the better choice overall from a talent perspective. But of course, you have to take positional priority into account with that as well. So if you want to take the quarterback, you take Shador Sanders. But if we're just strictly talking about taking the best player available to them, that would either be Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, number three overall.
All right, I'm going to get to Carter and Hunter in the next segment, but I just want to ask you, Jackson Dart has also kind of been rising up the boards, or so it seems. Where does he fall into the conversation? Late first round, early second round, or just day three?
He's a second round quarterback to me, just because of the transition process. I think that's going to take a little bit longer than some of the other guys in this class, just because of the offense that he played in. It really didn't prepare him a whole bunch from a read standpoint as far as what he's going to be doing on the next level. And Lane Kiffin does an incredible job of scheming a lot of wide receivers open in that offense. So he definitely a lot of times didn't have to go past his first or second option in his progressions a whole lot. So that's going to be a big adjustment for him. Also, consistently playing under center as well. That's another adjustment that he's going to have to make along with the other quarterbacks in this year's class at the top as well. So there's some things that give me some reservations as far as from a transition period with him. I think it's going to take a little bit more time than Ward and then also Sanders.
Realistically speaking, if the Giants were to draft a quarterback in this class, who is the best fit and where do you see that guy going in terms of the rounds?
Well, Cam Ward, I've always said was the best fit with Brian Daboll, but it seems like Tennessee is really locked in on taking a quarterback at one overall, and that seems to be Cam Ward as of today. But things change. You never know. But as of today, Cam Ward seems to be the favorite to be the number one overall pick. But after that, it would be Shador Sanders as far as the fit and Brian Daboll's offense. I think a lot of things that he wants to do in that offense, Shador has already shown that he's capable of doing a lot of those things.
And another guy whose name seems to be rising up the board is Tyler Shuck of Louisville. How does he fit into what the Giants do, and what do you like about him?
Yeah, he's another that really is rising up a lot of boards. I have him as a third round pick right now on my board. I'm not as high as some other people on him, just because the thing with Shuck is that he's only had really one healthy season in college, and that was his last year at Louisville. So you have to take durability into account. The age doesn't really matter to me, honestly, even though he's an older prospect at 26 years old. I think the more experience, the better for quarterbacks, like we saw last year with Bo Nixon and also Jaden Daniels. I'm never going to complain or knock a quarterback for having too many reps in college, just because I think the college game does a lot of positive things as far as preparing quarterbacks for what they could see on the NFL level. So the age doesn't really matter a whole bunch to me. Even though he's going to be red flag for some teams just because he's going to be a 26-year-old rookie. But for me, it doesn't really matter, honestly, just because of the experience that he has. But it's more so the durability, but also the traits. I definitely think he has a lot of translatable traits. I go back to that Notre Dame game of where he was able to show a lot of things inside and then also outside of the pocket as well. He's really decisive. He can create plays in stretches outside of the pocket as well, which I think is definitely something that's required of quarterbacks in today's game. You can't just be somebody whose game is just predicated upon winning inside of the pocket as well. So there's a lot of interest with Tyler Shuck. I'm not as high as some of my other counterparts and where I've seen him projected. I think he's more so of a third or fourth round quarterback.
Jordan, I don't know if you've gotten to next year, but the early word is that next year's quarterback group is going to be a lot better than this year's, as far as, teams that need quarterbacks picking the guy that they want. If you're Brian Dable and Joe Shane of the Giants, do you say, okay, you know what? We'll go best available in round one. Maybe we'll pick up a developmental guy, but we'll look to get our long-term guy next year. And if so, is there anybody emerging right now? And I know things can change, but is there anybody emerging that you think might be a good ideal fit for the Giants next year?
Yeah, I'm actually happy you asked me about this just because I'm responsible for our 2026 way too early mock draft. So I have to go ahead and watch all these quarterbacks really starting in about March, just so I can form a really good opinion about a lot of these guys potentially that are upcoming in this next year's draft class. But there's a lot of intriguing players, I will say. Just to reel off some names: Cade Klubnik out of Clemson, his one Drew Aller, who was on the fence as far as coming out this year, but he ultimately decided to go back for his senior season out of Penn State. Garrett Nussmeier out of LSU is another name that you hear a lot about. Lenore Sellers out of South Carolina, who's a name I think is really going to rise if he stays on schedule there with the Gamecocks. So I think the depth of the 2026 class is definitely better early on from what I see right now than what we presently see in 2025. And then also, there's always a guy that comes out of nowhere. I don't know who that guy is going to be. Frankly, we won't know until probably about December or next January. So I definitely think the outlook of 2026 looks better right now than what we see in 2025. But there's always a lot of variables and factors that happen. But I just think the Giants need to live in the now, especially with Brian Daboll and then also Joe Shane needing to show some type of progress this next year, or they could be out of jobs. So definitely think they need to stay in the present as far as trying to find a quarterback, whether it's Shador Sanders or Cam Ward or whoever it may be, Tyler Shuck. There's plenty of other names on day two or day three that they could look after as well. But I love them doubling down on Russell Wilson and also Jameis Winston, just because you don't go into the draft really pigeonholing yourself, assuming that you don't get a quarterback at number three overall.
Hey, Giant fans, imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd, and witnessing unforgettable moments. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person, and getting tickets shouldn't be stressful. That's where Game Time comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last minute seats at unbeatable prices. Game Time Picks Curation makes it easier to find better value for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And they offer super deals and the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if you find a seat in the same section or row or for less elsewhere. With seat views before you buy, no surprise fees, and a lowest price guarantee, you can book with total confidence. So go on and take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code Locked On to get $20 off your first purchase. That's promo code Locked On, LOCKEDON, for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. All right, we're speaking with Jordan Reid, ESPN draft analyst. And Jordan, I want to talk about Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter in this segment. Let's start with Hunter. There's some debate as to whether he's the best at a cornerback, best at receiver. The odds of him playing both full time, probably not going to happen at the NFL level. Where do you see his best fit?
I see him as a corner, honestly, Patricia. I would play him there full time, and then I would sprinkle him in about 20 to 25 plays a game as a receiver. But there are some evaluators that are on the opposite belief of that. He's a receiver full time, and then you play him more so as a corner, whether it's at nickel or sprinkle him in the red zone or somewhere that form or fashion. So I personally view him as a corner, but I'd be really intrigued to pair him with Malik Neighbors full time. That would give a lot of people headaches on the offensive side of the ball. But me personally, I would play him at corner full time and then sprinkle him in about 20 to 25 plays a game as a receiver.
How do you think they could, play off of each other, Malik Neighbors and Hunter at receiver?
I mean, it wouldn't be hard to figure out. Both of those guys are really dynamic. Neighbors was one of my favorite players in last year's class, and we saw how quickly he was able to transition as a rookie. He clearly was their best weapon on offense. I think Malik more so is that explosive three-level threat, and Travis, he really is the jack of all trades of where you can use him in so many different facets, excuse me. But whenever you have two dynamic players like that, you just get the ball in their hands and you let their development figure it out on their own.
Yeah, definitely. Now, as for Abdul Carter, if I'm not mistaken, this past year they switched his position. I think they moved him more outside. He had been inside more so. Um, where do you see him potentially fitting in on a defense? Can he carry over that versatility, or is he more or less strictly an outside pass rusher type?
Well, I think you play him off of the edge in the NFL, but with his experience at off-ball linebacker, you can use him in those sub packages or those obvious passing downs. And just like what Penn State did, they blitzed him over the middle. They allowed him to cover over the middle too. He's just such an explosive athlete. There's so many different ways that you could use him. My only hang up with the Giants is that it would be really hard to get him a lot of reps just because you already have Brian Burns and then you also have Kayvon Thibodeau as well. So you're going to sacrifice somebody's development, whether it's KT or Abdul Carter. But if you draft Abdul Carter, then that's probably not a great sign for Thibodeau as far as re-signing him in 2026 or whatever it is that they want to do going forward with that. So just figuring out the rotation with all those guys, I think that would be the most challenging part. But like we've seen, and the Giants see it twice a year with the Philadelphia Eagles, you can never have too many pass rushers.
I know everybody has injuries, but in the case of Abdul Carter, how much have, the shoulder, the fact that he wasn't able to work out at the pro day, the foot stress reaction that he had that was discovered at the combine, do you think that that has hurt his draft stock any?
I don't think it hurt it at all, but I think it's something that you definitely have to consider from a long-term viewpoint. Is this somebody that is going to constantly be banged up in the future and somebody that you worry about from a durability standpoint? But he didn't miss any games at Penn State, so I don't think it's something that you overreact to, but it's just something that you definitely, take into account as far as long-term. Is it something that's going to affect him or hamstring him as far as on his long-term outlook? But the signs that we have seen to this point of his career, he hasn't had any durability concerns at all.
And just kind of going back to the first round, I've seen where some draft analysts say they have like 12 legitimate first round grades on guys. I don't know how you stand, but where do you see this first round? I mean, does it make sense for the Giants to maybe trade down a little bit, or is it just, in your opinion, there's just not enough first round guys and they should just stay put?
Well, I think the Giants are in a good spot just because they're in position to get one of the three blue chip guys, in my opinion, in this year's draft. So the three blue chippers that I have are Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, and then also Mason Graham. Those are my three quote unquote blue players in this year's draft. But if you can get one of Hunter or Abdul Carter, assuming that Cam Ward goes one to Tennessee, I think you're sitting in a good spot. So I don't think there's any need for them to trade back from number three, especially if you're in contention for one of those three guys.
You mentioned Mason Graham. It's a very deep defensive line class. I mean, do you see a lot of guys potentially that would ordinarily maybe be first, second round picks drop into three, four, five?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible, especially when you don't have a lot of elite type of talents at the top of the draft. This draft is not anywhere close to last year's draft as far as the talent at the top of the board. So I think we're going to see a lot of surprises, especially inside of the top 15, just because there's not a consensus of first round number of first round grades in this year's class.
When you look at the strengths of this year's draft class versus the Giants' needs, obviously, where do you see the best fits for the Giants besides obviously defensive line, which they need a three tech next to Dexter Lawrence. I think we can both agree on that. But where else do the strengths align with what the Giants need?
Yeah, defensive line is definitely one. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think we could see a lot of those guys go inside of the first round and well into day two. There's going to be a lot of players that we see come off the board really quickly from this loaded defensive line class. And I know they have Tyrone Tracy already, but running back, a bigger running back would be something that I would consider for them. And it doesn't have to be early. It could be the fourth or the fifth round. Somebody like a Damian Martinez out of Miami, Ali Gordon the third out of Oklahoma State, that bigger bell cow type of player that you can pair with Tyrone Tracy. So running back would definitely be one. And then offensive line. I definitely think they still need to invest along the offensive line, whether it's guard or tackle. Even though this class isn't relatively great throughout the mid to late points of the draft, I still will continue to look to invest along the offensive line.
All right, now, Jordan, I want to ask you about your sleeper picks because there's always guys that, we don't hear a whole lot about, but in the scouting community, they're generating a lot of buzz. Who are some of those guys that you think would be really excellent value, maybe like on day three that people just aren't talking about?
Yeah, so I'll just stay with the Giants' needs. I'll go with defensive tackle Omar Norman Lott out of Tennessee is one that I'm very high on. I actually have a fourth round grade on him right now. They really used him as what's called a DPR, a designated pass rusher. So he only played 20 or more snaps in 5 out of the 13 games the season ago. So that just goes to show you that they really like to use him in those late down sub package situations. He's really explosive. Has really good hands as well as a pass rusher. Still needs to improve against the run, but if you use him in those late down situations, I definitely think he is one that a lot of people definitely could like. And then along the offensive line, there's a lot of guys. that I like in this year's class. Luke Kandra out of Cincinnati is one, and then also Miles Frazier out of LSU are two guard names that I think could go, in the third or fourth round that I think could end up being starters.
If you had to predict, because I mean, every year we see it, every year there is a surprise nobody saw coming, and it usually happens in the first round. Where do you see that surprise maybe coming?
Uh, that's a great question, just because I think it could be the opposite this year. There's not gonna, well, let me back up. I think there is gonna be a lot of surprises in the first round this year, and there's gonna be some names that aren't in the consensus first round picks right now, that could go in the first round. Who are those names are? I don't really know, honestly, but that's gonna be the fun part of this year's draft, just because there's a lot of names that you see commonly projected inside of the first round that I think we could see some guys that, more so we're seeing as second round picks could be selected inside of the first round. Somebody like Donovan Jackson, the offensive lineman out of Ohio State. He definitely is one name. A Jonah Savanea out of Arizona is another name that I could see going in the first round as well. So we could be in store for a lot of surprises in the first round, just because there's not a lot of consensus at the top of this year's draft inside of round one.
Do you think there'll be a lot of trades in the first round?
I mean, it could be, but I would say no, just because really in this year's draft, the player that you pick really at pick 15 is really going to be the same player that you get at pick 50. So the quality of the player is really going to be the same inside of those draft ranges. So I don't think there's going to be a lot of intrigue or aggression to trade up, just because of the quality of the player. Really at pick 15 to pick 50 is really the same player.
And then if you had to pick one developmental quarterback that would be ideal for the Giants, like maybe a day three guy,
Mhm.
would be your pick for them and why?
Uh, that's a great question too. He's not a day three guy, but I would be really intrigued in his Jalen Milroe out of Alabama, just because of the foundational skill set that he has from an athleticism standpoint. He's just not refined as a passer in the short to intermediate areas of the field right now. So just looking at him, the present foundation that he has, he would be one that I'm really intrigued by. Another is Will Howard, out of Ohio State. Big stature, 6'5", 240 pounds, a solid enough arm, I think, to survive in the NFL. But he's somebody that you do have to take some developmental steps with him, and then also have some patience in order to get something out of him in the long run.
And then, just sticking with the quarterbacks for a moment, there is no guarantee that Brian Dable, Joe Shane will be back after this year. Obviously, it all depends on how they do. But that being said, is there a danger in taking a quarterback, in terms of, fitting a specific system, and then you run the risk of maybe a new coaching staff comes in and maybe the guy's not a fit, or are there enough guys in this class at quarterback that you feel can be, can easily adapt to different systems?
But we just saw it last year with the number one overall pick, and also number three with Caleb Williams and Drake May. Both of those coaching staffs are now gone. So I think you always take the quarterback that you feel has the best traits that fit your system. You can't really try to help yourself gain a longer leash by taking, a certain quarterback. But you always take the guy that you feel is best at the time, that you feel best fits your system, but also is worthy of that draft slot as well.
And then your final question for you, Jordan. If by some reason the Giants are able to work out a trade with the Tennessee Titans to move up to number one, what do you anticipate the cost would be? And what do you anticipate would be a realistic cost? Because there's what the cost will be and what's realistic.
Yeah, so in my mock draft a few weeks ago, or excuse me, coming out of the combine, I actually had the Giants trading up to number one overall, and it was for number three overall. It was for a second round pick, I believe 34, and then also a third round pick in 2026. So obviously the cost is going to be much more than that. And if the rumors are true, it's going to take at least two first round picks, but that would just be a little bit too much for me, especially when you're only talking about going up two draft slots. So I just don't see it as realistic right now for them trading up to number one overall. So you're hoping one of Cam Ward or Shador Sanders is available to you at number three overall. And if you feel they're worthy of that draft slot, then you go ahead and pick them. But if not, I think you pick one of Travis Hunter and then also Abdul Carter. And then I think another option, if Shador Sanders starts to slide, I would pigeonhole that number, or I would earmark number 20 overall, just ahead of the Pittsburgh Steelers as a range that they could trade up if Shador starts to slide. I think that's something that the Giants definitely have to keep in mind if Sanders starts to slide. Don't let them get to Pittsburgh just because that's an obvious spot as far as them picking a quarterback. So you could look to trade up, give up some second round, excuse me, some day two picks, and even a pick next year to move up ahead of the Pittsburgh Steelers at number 21 overall.
You don't think Shador will get past the Raiders? I mean, I know they just acquired Geno, but I don't know if Geno's the long-term answer there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's possible. I think you could go six to the Raiders, nine to the Saints is also a possibility as well. But you also have to prepare for every scenario that could happen. You never know what could happen on draft day. There's plenty of guys that slide in the draft, but just in this particular scenario, if we're just playing it out, if Shador does start to slip and he gets 220, I definitely would be interested to trade up ahead of the Steelers in order to get him.
All right, Jordan, before we let you go, just let everybody know when your next mock draft is coming out or draft feature, and just let everybody know when they can see that.
Yeah, so I actually have a 7 round mock draft coming out April 21st, predicting every pick. So hopefully I get all of the Giants picks correct. I know they have a ton of picks this year. So really looking forward to doing that exercise. That will come out April 21st on ESPN Plus. Then also we're releasing articles every single day, our big buzz files, just sharing stuff that we're hearing within the league. We're releasing our player rankings every single week as well. So you can find all that stuff along with my colleague Mel Kiper Jr., Phil Yates, and also Matt Miller on ESPN.com.
And you'll, of course, be part of the ESPN draft coverage, I assume.
Yes, I will. I will be on ESPN Radio this year.
All right. So we'll have to check it out. Ladies and gentlemen, he is Jordan Reid of ESPN. And I'm so proud of him. He's just the journey that he has taken. He's worked so hard, an example of what hard work will get you in this business. Jordan, thank you so much for all your insight and for spending some time with us here.
Thank you so much, Patricia. It's always a pleasure.
All right, Giant fans, that is going to do it for us on today's Locked On Giants podcast. Make sure you keep it here all week long. We'll have additional coverage for you on everything New York Giants.